Good evening, everyone. My name's Kath McCourt. I'm the convener of the RCN Fellows, and I'm delighted to welcome you all to this evening's event. It's a really great honour to have so many of you joining us. Just a little bit about the RCN Fellows. We are registered nurses who've had what is described as an exceptional contribution to the advancement of nursing and healthcare, and many of the RCN Fellows are inspirational leaders, and they have led clinical practice, practice development, education and research. And we work with the college to promote the profession and to influence policy. And tonight, I'm absolutely delighted that we are having a debate on nurse education. This is the second in a series of events that the Fellows have been organising, but we are very honoured this evening to have Baroness Tanni Grey-Thompson as our chair. And Tanni is extremely well versed in healthcare issues, and it's a real honour to have her here with us tonight. She will be with us till about 6:30 this evening. So I'm going to hand over to Tanni, and I'm sure she will welcome you all. So over to you, Tanni.
Professor McCourt, Kath, thank you very much, and it's a huge privilege to be with you tonight, and apologies for only being able to stay till 6:30, but I'm off to a celebration for people who work in social care, and you know, we all know the last 18 months have been pretty tough on so many people, and a chance to kind of learn, talk, share and celebrate, I think is really important. So I've been very privileged. I've got to sit on lots of platforms with Kath, because one of the things I do is I'm Chancellor of Northumbria University, and it's a huge privilege to do the degree ceremonies for the nursing students, none more so than this year when sorry, I get very emotional. You talk to the students about what they're going to do, what they've done in their final year, and listening to the student nurses talking about their final year has just been absolutely incredible, and I'm really proud of them and how they've stepped up. And I'm also just really proud of nurses in general. So my sister's a nurse, my brother-in-law's a doctor. Actually, my husband has a PhD in chemistry, but people think he's a real doctor, not a pretend one. Anyway, but for me, what's amazing is seeing the training, the work that my sister's gone through. I will never tell her this to her face, but the things that she's been telling me, not just the last 18 months, but through her career, has been amazing. And I have to be really grateful, because if it wasn't for nurses, I wouldn't be around. It's really as simple as that, in terms of saving my life at a couple of different points in my life. And what is really humbling is that when people stop me in the street and they say to me, "You're Sian's sister, aren't you?" It's like, yeah. And the words they always use are kind, caring, amazing person, gave time. And that for me is amazing. Never felt like she was like that with me, but that is a whole other story in terms of families and things like that. But you know, actually nursing is something to be celebrated and cherished. And the other thing that I think this is really important is actually a phrase that my father used to say to me all the time, which was, education gives you choices. And that is something I fundamentally believe in, and continuing education is really important for everybody. And you know, healthcare remains at the forefront of most of our minds at the moment, and you know, we know close enough to it the vital role nurses have played across areas of health policy, education, research and practice in the UK. But tonight we're going to hear from some very important people, 4 RCN Fellows. And these are innovative nurses who've had a significant impact on nursing and healthcare, and it's really amazing to be here to kind of listen to them share their experiences. So tonight's panel, we've got Hilary Chapman, McCormack and Sonja McIlfatrick, and I'm going to start off with asking Sonja a question. Sonja, as Dean of a faculty, and you're responsible for the beginning of a nurse's career, what challenges do you face preparing nurses for this new world of post-COVID care?
Okay, good evening and thank you, Tanni, and I'm delighted to be with everyone this evening and to, I suppose, give a response. And whenever we think about what we've really seen over the last, particularly the last 18 months, but what we've already known is that nurses are really essential to the delivery of healthcare and healthcare systems and wider. And I suppose on reflection for some of the key challenges, I probably would outline them within maybe 4 key areas. First of all, I think the main one, or the first one to start off with, is that we know that it's complex. In delivering a nursing programme, it contains both 50% theory and 50% practice. So as a head of school, whenever we're thinking, a lot of the delivery of our programme is really dependent on working in partnership with our practice colleagues. We can't deliver our programme without it, and our programme is complex of what we're preparing nurses to do. But what we have seen, and really what we think our focus is on preparing the future workforce. So we know that globally there's a shortage of nurses, and we have seen that there's potentially 6 million shortage of nursing global nurses across the world. And so what I have been really experiencing, and I know with my other colleagues, is the size and scale of the number of nurses. So we've seen an increase in people applying to do nursing, and the complexity of the programme alongside the number of people coming to do the programme has presented us with challenges, both linking in with practice. Another challenge is, and this challenge was there pre-COVID, so I suppose that's where we have, and we'll probably hear more of this tonight throughout our discussion, is that we have had our new nursing and midwifery standards and proficiencies for future nurse, future midwife. So we have our new standards, and that's almost like our blueprint of what we know, and really what the essence of that is around what knowledge do nurses need in order to deliver safe and compassionate and effective care. So that's what really it speaks to for the public. And with that, we have got various standards that are there and proficiencies that nurses need to deliver on. And we've seen changes in those. But a challenge that we have now with COVID is that whenever we look at those standards and those proficiencies, that we're preparing the nurses to go through, but then the work environment that they go. If I take an example of one of them is focused around emotional intelligence and also resilience. And what we have seen is in the context in which the nursing students are then moving into, where they have to be able to seek and offer support, or request support, and to manage that themselves and take some ownership of their own learning needs. That's challenging within the current context that they move out. And we can't underestimate the challenges that the nursing students have been through, but we've heard some very positive stories as well as some challenging stories of what they have experienced over the last 18 months. So it's important that we take the learning as we move ahead from that. A third challenge is really around even what we think what we're doing tonight. We're engaging in technology here, and it's great when it all works perfectly well. We've had some challenges, but for the education sector, we've had to revert and pivot very quickly to being online and thinking about different ways that we would provide our education. And that is not without its challenges, but what it does also give us is other opportunities. And the whole digital technology, we've moved probably in what we would normally take us 5 years to get to this point, we've moved exponentially within 1 year of what we've had to deliver. And that's been challenging for nurse educators. It's been challenging for nursing students, but it's also given us some opportunities. And we need to think about the digital platforms, the digital technologies, the different way that this gives some flexibility of learning as well. But what we see as a challenge is alongside that, it's maybe about striking a balance between having the technology and what that can afford. But what we have been discussing is around what we call the socialization of nursing and nursing students, so that they get socialized into thinking about their professional identity. And we have, and I was in a conversation earlier this week, but draw on the work of Kath Melia from the 1980s that talked about how we socialize nurses as well and prepare them for the role and the profession that they're going to enter into. So it's important to challenge when we think about that as educators, how we get a balance in that. And fourthly, I would be remiss of me not to say, as a head of school of a large nursing school, whenever we think about the global shortage of nurses, that also has an implication on a shortage of nurse educators who are then required to prepare the future nursing workforce. So we have to think about that challenge and how that we prepare and pull in. And is that thought about? Is that been thinking in all of our workforce planning that we have in place? How do we prepare future nurse educators? How do we attract them to come into this area in the same way? That's a global challenge because we call it aging faculty. And I'm sorry, but all of us are getting a bit older. And so how do we attract and build in order for sustainability and future delivery? So that is another challenge that we have when we think about how we prepare the new graduates for entering into the workforce and the future workforce now. So just some points to think about, we can maybe pick up as we progress in our conversation tonight.
Thank you, Sonia. I was smiling when you were talking about nurse educators. So my sister, who's been on a COVID ward for the last 18 months, rang me one day and talked about homeschooling her children. And I said to her, but you're not a teacher. And she said to me, did you forget I did my PGCE? So very quickly I said, yeah, but that was to teach student nurses doing degrees who want to do them, not your children. And her response was, you're such a politician. But you raised some really important points there about resilience and pivoting online. We never would have thought of even vaguely doing anything like this 18 months ago, and the challenges that come with it. There is an opportunity to ask questions later, so if there's anything that as we're talking through you want to pick up on, please sort of drop that into the chat. Hilary next. Now Hilary, you're chief nurse of a large organisation delivering all aspects of acute and critical care. So how has education and training influenced recruitment and retention of nurses, which Sonia talked about, and what evidence do you have that a well-educated workforce enhances patient outcomes?
Great question, thank you, Tanni. Good evening, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here. I ought to say I'm a chief nurse at Sheffield Teaching Hospital. I retired from there, but I'm still very engaged with lots of other trusts now as well. So just starting on the sort of recruitment and retention angle, I think I'm going to start from a personal perspective. And I feel like I've been engaged in education and training for all of my career, and I know how motivated and hungry for knowledge that's kept me. So really personal perspective. And the other thing I'd say is, when we talk about education and training, let's look at it through a really wide lens, because it's not just about sitting in the classroom and being taught, it's about shadowing people, mentorship, reading, journal clubs, etc. A lot of my great learning's been through shadowing or visiting other places, and that's the sort of thing I'm saying is, let's look at it through a wider lens. But when you're leading 6,500 nurses, as I was in Sheffield, I think it's really important not just to think your own views are the only thing. So to keep myself in touch with the front line, I did a clinical shift every month. I still do clinical work now. And it's just so you can test that the things you're doing as chief nurse in an organisation are actually working. They're working for the workforce, for the nurses, midwives, support workers. So when I went to work on cardiology once, one of the charge nurses very proudly said to me, well, when I registered and graduated from Sheffield University, I didn't come to work here. And I said, oh. And he said, no, because, you know, the hospital down the road had a far better preceptorship program than you were. So hang your head in shame, Hilary. It was really powerful learning for me, because he talked about how he chose to start his career elsewhere because the programme in my hospital was not as good as theirs. So, you know, that's the importance, I think, of keeping in touch with the front line. And it's not just about registered nurses as well, it's about support workers, and we managed to retain a lot of our support workers by educating them, enabling them to understand better the work they were doing. And one of them famously said to me, you know, I'm not just doing it now, I understand what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. So there's lots of evidence, that's sort of anecdotal, but there's lots of evidence as well. But the evidence really focuses on early careers. And I noticed in the chat box, we've got quite a few early career nurses tonight. So a lot of the evidence talks about the value of that sort of preceptorship, ongoing clinical supervision, training, education. And that's the sort of thing that's attracted people to places, but also then kept them there as well. That sort of ongoing skills acquisition throughout your career. And one of the other things I'd add, it's not, because some people are better at applying for things than others and pushing themselves forward, but that real importance of fairness. of enabling not just the ones who push themselves forward to engage in education training, but make sure everybody can access education training and skills acquisition as well. So feeling valued, access and expertise, gaining new skills, they're the sorts of things that I think keep your workforce in your organisation, and also, you know, happy and have a good feeling of well-being. And then I think the second part of your question, Tanni, was around the evidence that a well-educated workforce actually affects and enhances patient outcomes. And again, I know from a personal perspective that being educated really enabled me to challenge and educate the patient better. And I remember that this sort of sense of pride in, I'd done my ITU course and I was able to say to the anaesthetist, do you know, I'm looking after this patient and everything looks fine on his monitor, on his ventilator, but something's just not quite right. So it's that education coupled with experience as well. And, you know, it was really interesting that that patient was actually blowing a pneumothorax at that time. And we picked it up really quickly. The doctor was able to intervene quickly and prevent that patient deteriorating. And I thought that's what education and experience did for me. But again, so to move in that, and another example is, you know, I used to get all the data about outcomes through my office, and we had this real rise in the number of heel ulcers on a particular ward. And when we looked into it, it was that we'd introduced a new piece of equipment, but we hadn't educated and trained the staff in using it correctly. So they didn't position it correctly. So we had a real hike in the incidence and prevalence of pressure ulcers, heel ulcers. So again, a real, you know, really important part of educating and training our workforce. So there's a massive evidence body around this, but it's largely around the degree nurses that make a difference to outcomes. But it focuses, really interests me, the evidence is on cardiac arrest and also on failure to rescue. And the evidence around some of the other outcomes isn't quite as strong. So it is strong around those two things, but what the evidence says is, if you start to look at lots of other things like falls, pressure ulcers, drug-related incidents, the evidence base, it's really variable and it's not as strong. So every piece of research that you read says, we need to do more, we need to do more. So there is a need to actually do more as well. But I just wanted to talk briefly about just some of those softer aspects as well, about the how the supportive working environment makes us happier at work. So I'm kind of touching back on recruitment and retention as well. But also, if you look at Michael West's work, what he says, and I'm putting his decades of work into a nutshell here, is health and well-being impacts on the ability that for us to provide compassionate care, and compassionate care can be learned. Key factors influencing health and well-being include education, learning and development. So there's this lovely circle of, if you are happy at work and you feel healthy and you have such a good mental well-being, you're enabled to provide compassionate care more easily. So it's a no-brainer, isn't it? We need to actually pick that up and use it in our education and training. So I'm a great fan of that. I think there's a harder aspect, but there's that softer aspect about people feeling happier at work, which not only keeps people in the workplace, and retention, but also enhances patient outcomes. So they're my thoughts on those two areas, Tanni. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Hilary. Next up, we have Brendan McCormack. Evening, Brendan.
Hi, Tanni.
So we know that registered nurses with clinical expertise enhances patient outcomes. You know, Hilary's talked really passionately about that. But how do you motivate nurses to further the art and the science of nursing? Can nurses balance evidence-based practice and efficiencies to ensure safe practice?
Great, and thank you for that, and lovely to be here with everybody else engaging in this really important discussion, particularly at this point in time, I think, in our history and where we're at. Again, there are two parts to that question with a multiple variety of ways to answer it. But I think to pick up the first part, which is really around motivating nurses for evidence-based practice and for advancing our art and science. Just by way of contextualizing that, just immediately prior to this event, I've come from facilitating a 3-day event with the Queen's Nursing Institute here in Scotland, who of course are kind of very much advancing the knowledge base within community nursing here. And as part of the work of the Queen's Nursing Institute in Scotland, we run a Queen's Nursing Development Programme for those nurses who are now designated as Queen's nurses, special breed across the country. I say that because one of the discussions, or a lot of the day we spent yesterday, on a theme of giving voice to nursing. So how do these really expert community nurse leaders give voice to their effectiveness, essentially, and particularly as we come out of COVID, given the kind of role that they played in sustaining communities and, you know, tackling some incredible difficult situations for some of our most vulnerable people in society. And what really struck me during the discussion, and actually what really struck them, was their almost the inability to succinctly say what it is a community nurse does, to succinctly say, this is the work that we do, this is what it is, this is the impact. And but just by chance, I think, kind of drew back deep in my history and went back to what we were taught as the meta paradigm of nursing, or as Alison would know from her theoretical work, this kind of framework that all nursing is shaped in. So what's so the 4 elements of it are, what are we saying about the person that we're providing care to and for and with? How does that person get impacted on by their environment, and what's the relationship between the environment and the person? What does that say, or how does that impact on their health, or what are the health implications of all of that? And then how does the relationship between those 3 things impact on our nursing interventions and the practice that we engage in? And what really, really surprises me is that was like new knowledge to many of these very experienced, very highly qualified nurses. And I think I'm on a bit of a mission to kind of rehabilitate the meta paradigm of nursing, because actually it shapes everything, and it should shape our research and our evidence base, and fundamentally is the art and science of nursing. And so I think we have a job to do to actually get nurses at all levels and all levels of experience to really understand this dynamic between those things that we are doing every day around the person, the environment and health, and what that means for us. And that should also be shaping our research. It should also be informing the kind of research we do and the kind of questions we need to be posing and providing an evidence base too. And one of my other roles is as the UK lead for research with the Council of Deans for Health. And we have done a publication around the place of research in pre-registration nursing, or nursing and allied health education. We drew on a lot of the work of the Royal College of Nursing and other Royal Colleges in that. And one of the things that's really important, and a really important message from that work, is how we really have to, frankly, make research in pre-registration nursing programs a bit more sexy, so that people don't see it as something they have to do, but actually something that is really essential to how they advance this art and science. And we still have a long way to go in making that really much more explicit, much more exciting, and something that people want to be driven by rather than something that they have to do. So that, I think there's a whole body of work that nurse educators and academics have really got to have more open dialogue about in relation to all of that. And I'm not convinced we are having enough of a dialogue about it. And we need to engage our students and others in it. The second part of the question, I think, is much more tricky, which is around the balance between art and science, evidence and effectiveness and safety, and that whole complexity, which feeds straight into my own kind of personal passion around person-centered practice and ensuring that everything we are doing is around creating care and practice that focuses on the person, whichever way we are looking at that person. But I think the answer to the question which was asked, which is, can nurses balance evidence-based practice and efficiencies to ensure safe practice? I think the answer to that, it depends on what it is they're being asked to be more efficient in. So, for example, as Sonja has already said, with the global emerging shortage of nurses, I don't think it's right to expect nurses to balance evidence-based practice on the basis that every time there's a vacancy for a registered nurse, that that's replaced by a lesser qualified person. Somehow it doesn't make sense to me in relation to balancing efficiencies and keeping people safe, but also advancing our knowledge base. How do we actually balance this very tricky thing that many nurses find themselves in, of keeping people safe and going with an evidence base, but at the same time responding to the individual needs of a person? And my own background is in dementia care, where of course that is the essence of good dementia practice, is going against what might be seen as the evidence. You have to go with the person, and we have to be really quite skilled and really expert in making those kind of judgments, because a judgment I might make about going against the evidence base about how to keep somebody with dementia safe actually could put them at risk, but actually that's the risk they want to take. So how do we balance these things? So we really need to kind of keep that agenda very strong, but I think we have to be really cautious about what efficiencies we are talking about, what are the risks we are asking people to take, and what evidence are we paying attention to or not paying attention to? And I think both of those things are really important. And I'm sure we would have a lot more discussion about all of that as this evening goes on, actually.
Brilliant, thank you. And it's amazing to see tonight that there's a large number of students who are online, which is really exciting in terms of learning and joining everyone up together. So we're now going to move on to the second part of the question and answer session, and this is for all of you in no particular order. But what advice would you give to a newly qualified registered nurse that would sustain them through their career? And this is particularly important because we've got lots of students online. I'm going to start with Sonja first.
Okay. Well, I suppose one of the key things I would say is don't be afraid to ask questions. So even tonight, as we're going here, here's an opportunity you have to have a voice. And it does also speak a bit to what I said in terms of digital literacy and digital technology. Maybe if we were in a large lecture theatre, you might feel intimidated to put your hand up and speak. And it speaks to what Brendan said about have a voice. So you have an opportunity now. So really, don't be afraid to ask questions. And what I mean by that is, I mean to ask questions both for your learning, but also for clarity. You know, as you become a newly registered nurse and you're in an environment and you're not quite sure of what you're being expected to do or what you're being asked to do, you know, and also to have reassurance of what's there, and also but to challenge as well. You know, if you think in asking the questions and have a curiosity around practice and around learning, asking the questions. But within that, the counter side to that is also don't be afraid to hold to your core values. So when you see things that are there, and keep grounded in your values and what's there. So as you've gone through your education program, and as I've said, we have our standards, we have our delivery, we have the things that when I work with, you know, the nursing students and the graduates, and I try to instill the core values of their program and the profession and what's there, and within our you know, delivery, keep grounded with them. And we do have a saying, and I know maybe other colleagues have used it, but the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. So when you see care that you maybe is questionable, or things that are there in your practice, or picking up with what Brendan's saying around evidence-based practice and just things that are there, you know, you have to be brave. So don't be afraid to ask the questions, and keep absolutely grounded in your values, because that's your moral compass. That's there, and it's like, you know, I almost call it like your true north. That's the piece that's there with all the other things that may come and the challenges, and they will come. There's no point in us giving you a sense of saying it'll be okay and it's fine. And as I suppose as an educator, when we come to the end and we have our graduates and they're ready to leave and embark on the registration, we say, this is great, you're here, you're entering the register, this is it. And we do know in terms of the evidence and what it's showing us, it's retaining nurses within the workforce is a challenge a number of years on, and challenges will come, but keep grounded in your values and keep asking those questions.
I think there's no daft questions. If you think it's a question, then actually people have an obligation to kind of answer and help and educate, actually, and kind of pay it forward a little bit on completely lower level. I saw an athlete not make a Paralympic team because he didn't ask the question, a really, really important question about selection. And he didn't make the team, and then found out a week later that he hadn't made it because he was too worried about just saying, okay, what time of the day is the selection meeting? It's a really stupid question, but that meant he missed out on a whole 4-year cycle by not asking what he thought was a stupid question. Anyway, Hilary next, please.
Yeah, thanks. I'm just going to continue slightly on the same theme. Is like, don't think anybody's too important for you to ask a question of. Because you know that people put people on pedestals and they think you're too important to approach. You're not. You really want, well, I always wanted to be approached. You know, if somebody stopped me on a corridor, on a ward and said, can I just ask you? You think, great. And particularly if it was something challenging, bring it on. You know, that's what keeps us vibrant. But I think it's just what keeps you motivated. Nursing has been the most fantastic career. I was supposed to do business studies with French at university, and I changed my mind at the last minute because I met somebody who motivated me. Thank the Lord I did that. You know, it's sort of always, there's so many opportunities now that it's find something that gets your head off the pillow in the morning. You do not have to stay in a job you don't enjoy. Hopefully, you get into the wrong job and you move, people won't judge you for that. If you can, you know, explain it, say, I tried this job, I didn't like it, so I moved on. So find something that gets your head off the pillow. Make time for yourself to reflect, to consolidate, all those sorts of things. Take ownership. Nobody else will manage your career for you. It's for you to manage your career. Look for opportunities. Ask for opportunities. I was once minding my own business, serving on a national committee, and somebody said to me, would you like to shadow the Secretary of State for Health? And you think, and I said, yes, I would actually. And I learned more from those 3 days that she enabled me to spend with her than lots of other sort of more didactic teaching opportunities. So take those opportunities that are offered, make the opportunities, ask for opportunities, and find something that really gets your head off the pillow. Talk to colleagues, approach people, ask them questions. Nobody's too important to talk to you. So, I think actually we've already touched on it, but be prepared for the knockbacks, because you will get knockbacks. I've had knockbacks in my career. I haven't had jobs that I've applied for, so don't be afraid of that. But it's a real privilege to be a nurse. It's a passport to anything you want to do. So take the opportunities. Thank you.
It just motivates me listening to the passion that you talk about there, which is amazing. And I think, you know, from what I've seen, where I've seen really good leaders, actually they're not frightened to put really good people around them, and they're not frightened to actually just to talk to anyone. And I've seen people handle it where they might be going to a meeting and say, look, I can't talk now, but this is my number, get some time in my day. You know, actually there's ways actually leaders can be really good at what they do as well. Brendan, are you going to motivate me with more work? I kind of feel like I could take on the world from listening to Sonja and Hilary, to be honest.
Oh, I'm not sure. Well, I'm going to steal 3 words to shape this. I'm going to steal it from another great Scottish nurse, actually, but Rona Hotchkiss, who actually went on to be the governor of one of the biggest prisons in Scotland. So a really significant nurse who took all that she learned about nursing into the prison sector, which is fantastic. And she always says, when she talks about, how did she operate as a leader? She would say 3 things. It was about being boring, being brave, and being bonkers. And that's the advice I would give to every graduate, really, is the same. So the boring bit is that we have to be really clear about following the rules, following the guide, following the standards, following the frameworks that we work in, and know that we have to follow them, and there is no compromise in those. The brave bit is really about what we've been talking about so far, which is to really not be afraid of stepping up, to be brave enough to ask those questions, to be brave enough to question the culture that is driving people out of practice, to be brave enough to just be that one who does that difficult challenge, and to actually really own that, as Sonja said earlier, from the basis of the values that we're all working with. And that is so significant as long as we are paying attention to the boring stuff. And then the bonkers bit is essentially about just doing stuff, making a difference, just thinking the stuff that nobody else is thinking about, turning that into stuff that we could trial, that we can make a difference with, that we can start to be passionate about and drive forward, that becomes research agendas, that becomes a focus for everything we're trying to do, and that we really carry forward with us. Most of us who are in these senior positions, be they academic or management or whatever, really have had those gems from the time we graduated. You know, what drives me now around person-centered practice is the thing I experienced as a student nurse back in the 80s. It is still that same motivation of preventing some of the things that I experienced and did back then, that still drives me around driving that agenda about how we put the person first in care decisions. So don't step away from thinking you're bonkers. If you're thinking something is bonkers, then go with it.
Brilliant, thank you, Brendan. Now, one of our participants we've got online tonight is Jess Sainsbury. Jess, are you there?
I am. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hi.
Sorry, ridiculously excited that it worked. Would you like to introduce yourself? Because you've got a question for the panel, haven't you?
Yes, I have. Thank you so much, Tanni. My name's Jess Sainsbury. I am an early career nurse. I'm currently working at the Florence Nightingale Foundation and undertaking my Masters in Global Health. But I have a question on behalf of the RCN's newly registered nurses network. A quick plug of the network, if I may. We are a group of early career nurses and student nurses in their last 6 months of their programs, and we offer peer support to students making the transition from student to registrant, and then registrants in their first, 18 to 24 months, something like that. We don't put a timestamp on it. But the question is that we, as in the group of RCN and NRN, we're increasingly hearing from early career nurses who wish to journey on a non-traditional career pathway in nursing, exploring the other pillars of nursing and not necessarily the clinical one. So to the panel, what would your advice be for newly registered nurses in this position and thinking about that? Thank you.
I'm going to keep the same order. So Sonja first, please. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jess, and lovely to meet you this evening, and delighted to hear about the work that's taken forward. So I do think that's really important work. I suppose a couple of observations for me is that I think it's really exciting to hear of the breadth, and I think it picks up on Hilary's point, of the breadth of opportunities that are there for nursing, and also picks up on Brendan if it's maybe something that's a bit bonkers. And I think for some of us, we took opportunities within our career that came along in order to move into other areas perhaps that hadn't. I know I took very early in my career an opportunity for a secondment at that time to what was called a Centre for Nursing Research, and it was something I never planned, never envisaged, but it was an opportunity and it was taking it. For me, I think we need to move away from this idea that we have whenever you say early career, and I don't think it's necessarily mutually exclusive. I think when you're informed and when you've sought advice and mentorship and support for those options, I don't think that we should be setting, you have to do this number of clinical years before you progress on. I think historically we might have had that perception, and it's not something that I would necessarily subscribe to. But I also think when you say, it's a bit like they're not mutually exclusive, because if I decided as an early career research to undertake, which I did in terms of my master's quite early on, I don't see that I'm no longer clinically and working in a clinical environment. I'm undertaking research and evidence-based practice that is asking questions of what I'm doing that has a clinical impact and a clinical focus. So there are opportunities within that you can still keep the door open and do work that's still highly clinically relevant for our patients and for patient care, but maybe that just has a different focus. So I think embrace those opportunities. I also think traditionally we might have said that as nurses, we did, it's almost like we ate our young before. We need to be supporting our early career researchers in those opportunities that are there. And it speaks to what we've said, be brave and be a bit bonkers and actually take the opportunities that are there with advice and support. And you can still always keep, I think Hilary picked it up earlier in terms of taking for the opportunities there. Don't close doors. It's not necessarily you have to close doors. You could still undertake a pathway that has still a clinical element there, or maybe working some time, still keeping up some clinical input there, but it's a pathway you choose. So I don't see it as necessarily closing a door and mutually exclusive. I just see it as a different way and a different pathway, but I would embrace the opportunities. Thank you.
Hilary.
Yeah, thanks. Nice to meet you, Jess. I will email you. I've got your email address now. So I think, as healthcare changes, the need for nurses and nursing role changes as well. So, let's keep up with the times. Not every single nursing role that's valuable is based at the bedside or in the patient's home or in the clinic. There are lots of other nursing roles that add huge value to patient outcomes. So let's just open our minds slightly. I think the only thing I'd say to you is find some way of anchoring your role so that you can almost check that what you're doing is the right thing. So good educators do it, good researchers do it. And as a chief nurse, I had to do it as well, because otherwise you really could sit in your office 5 days a week in glorious isolation. So it's find a way of anchoring your work, and that's sort of personal. It's what works for you to enable you to check what you're doing and whether it's having the resonance that you want it to have. Message to the profession: let's value all these roles. Let's not just shut them out because they're not at the bedside and they're not a real nurse. What rubbish. You know, I've worked with such fantastic people who aren't based in clinical practice, but what they have done is done that thing that I said, it's find a way of anchoring your practice to testing whether what you're doing is having the right impact. And it may be, I mean, portfolio careers, bring them on. I now have a portfolio career. I wish I'd known about them before. And somebody put in the chat box about your career doesn't have to be linear. It can, you know, it can be zigzag. I'm saying it again, the world is your oyster. It's absolutely brilliant. Put your toe in the water, have a go. If you don't like it, go back. So let's value those roles, find a way of connecting, find different ways of actually looking for opportunities. So, and good luck where you are. I will be in touch.
Brilliant. Brendan.
Great, thank you. And thanks, Jess. Great, challenging question. I think that we have, again, a lot of work to do in nursing. So I totally agree with Hilary about this is something we've got to really just get on with and wake up to, really, in many ways. I would agree with everything that Sonja and Hilary have said about this, so I'm not going to repeat that. But what I would give is an example, and it links to somebody in the chat said earlier about, you know, we may promote research in the pre-registration programs, for example, but then, you know, the challenges of maintaining a research career in practice are really pretty grim, given that only 0.02 of nurses are actually in clinical academic careers compared to medicine, which is around 40% or something. So, you know, we have a huge amount of work to do around actually ensuring that we have the best academics connected with practice settings in a most diverse form possible. But so I've been here at Queen Margaret's for just coming up to 8 years, and whilst I've been here, I made a point of trying to fast track the best graduates coming off our nursing program by weaving together in various ways pots of money that meant I could take 1 or 2 of the best graduates from our programs who are graduating with a first class honours straight into being a research assistant for a year, straight into a PhD program. And in the 8 years, we've now had 7 nurses come through that. So they are doctors with their doctorates at the age of 26, 27. And 2 of them are now working with me as lecturers, teaching and educating the next sort. They are phenomenal people, absolutely phenomenal. But they probably get told every day of their life, sometimes by my own team members, which has been embarrassing, about their need to get proper experience. And whenever I ask, well, what is this proper experience they're meant to have? You know, it is the kind of mentality of you haven't done 25 years at the bedside. And, you know, we have really got to get rid of this notion of, I mean, I have a really interesting discussion I'd love to have about what we mean by the bedside. Because, you know, the majority of nursing is not happening by bedsides. It's happening in a whole variety of other places. And so we have to really, really challenge this perspective that, you know, it's numbers of years that count rather than actually the amount of experience and learning that people have accumulated over time. And I feel passionately about those kind of initiatives that I've been doing, for example, and there are others happening that really fast track people through the system, that get our best really into the best positions where they're really able to influence and make change and shift the culture. And we need lots and lots of that, and not just try and keep people in boxes in some kind of linear way.
Brilliant. Thank you, Brendan. Jess, thank you so much for your question. That is brilliant. Thank you. Just to let you know, I'm going to change it around. I'm going to come to Brendan first for the next question, because I feel like I've been going to Sonja first. So give her a little bit of thinking time. You know, the current context of where we are, the pandemic, and how do you see sort of managing sort of COVID risk and placements, and how that impacts experience and quality of education? Brendan.
Yep.
Big question. You've got a couple of minutes, well, a minute maybe.
It's a huge area, and I'm sure many people on this debate are just like I am, up to their neck in trying to manage it currently. We have this very catch-22 situation where in some practice settings currently, or some of our health systems, we have a shortage of nurses, running at about 60% of the required workforce. And at the same time, we are trying to get our students out into practice for their practice learning experience when those same nurses are frankly on their knees. And yes, they really want to support and supervise those students, but it's just another thing that they're trying to deal with. But it's a very difficult situation for all of us, because of course, without those students getting that practice learning experience, then they end up not being able to join the workforce in a timely way, and it just gets all stacked up. So I think there's a huge amount of work that we are all doing around diversity of placement and practice learning, about not drawing on those traditional placements that we've always drawn on. And I would name research again, because there's a huge amount of research places that are not used, but also the third sector and communities and a whole array of places really that are not seen as typical health provision, including we have students in therapeutic gardens and those kind of places where they really learn about people and about how people live their lives and connect and those kind of things. Also the whole simulation agenda, and we do have a challenge with that with our regulator in terms of how much simulation we are allowed to do that replaces practice hours. And I think there is that the RCN actually needs to really do some further work on that to allow us to use more simulation instead of practice hours in practice settings that enables freeing up of that learning. So I think those are the three top highlights for me, and I'm conscious of others coming in, but it is a big challenge, but I think there are massive opportunities for us here as well to do things very differently and to think very differently about the kind of practice learning we want our students to have.
I'm just going to throw in a personal point here. I always think it'd be really nice for maybe a teacher to be Secretary of State for Education, maybe a nurse to be Secretary of State for Health. I will leave that there. Hilary.
Yeah, thank you. Notwithstanding, I don't want to lose sight of the harrowing and tragic circumstances that have happened, and lots of nurses have been through very difficult times through the pandemic. However, what we've gained out of this is the value of the NHS and the value of nursing. You can see that by the amount of applications and that they've gone up exponentially, some statistician will pick me up on that, but they've gone up a lot. So the value of nursing and the NHS has it's really had a boost. So let's not lose sight of that. And I think the other things I'd say is very similar things to Brendan, really. It's like, let's not lose what we've learned. Because if somebody had said to me, you can teach 120 nurses online, I'd have said, forget it, I can't. But of course, we've had to. So we've gained some new skills, not just skills, sort of virtual skills, but skills in caring for a different group of people who previously we've probably cared for these people in ones, twos, fives, hundreds, thousands. So let's not lose sight of the skills, and let's actually reflect on them, embed them in our future education as well. Think about things like how I was involved in assessment Nightingale Hospital in the Northwest. New skill set for me, I've never done that before. So we've actually learned a lot. We've learned to be more agile. We've learned to respond to circumstances. We've learned to respond to new things that we've never actually had to deal with before. And the other thing I'd say is through all that learning through adversity, the value of mental health and well-being has never been as well recognised as it is now. Bring it on. That, absolutely key. Let's not lose sight of that in our workforce and in our profession, because that has brought it to the fore in very tragic circumstances. But still, let's not lose that, because I think, that place of compassionate leadership has never been further towards the front of our profession.
Thank you, Hilary. Sonja.
Just, I suppose I could echo completely what my colleagues have just said, but for me, it also is just both the visibility and recognition of the role of nursing, but also nurses have a key role, and we are prepared to deal with health crisis. Yes, this has come on, and I don't underestimate on all of it personal people here in terms of their personal life and everything else, and we do not want to diminish the reality of what all we've had to deal with and certain people in different areas, and I never would want to do that. But I just reflect and I think, you know, in terms of the education and the preparation that goes on, you know, this is something that we deal with people and crisis. You know, there are major incidents that happen. If I reflect on even our own situation in Northern Ireland throughout the Troubles and throughout those times, and within those times that were very challenging, they also have afforded opportunity where people have really, in terms of stepped up and been able to deliver and been able to be creative in how we've done. And as Hilary has said, new things that we never thought we would be able to do. From an education point of view, I think, as Brendan says, we've seen new opportunities in practice learning and in placement opportunities that free up and highlight the other skills that people need to be able to develop, and a focus on public health, talking therapies, all those other elements, and also the reality of the digital. And as I've indicated earlier, yes, there's challenges. Yes, it's not always the way we'd want it to be, but with tragedy and with challenges come opportunity, and we need to be creative and innovative around what we do and evolve. And I think we have done that, and I think we should take cognizance of that and reflect on it. And our students, and just I suppose to finally say, the stories that we've heard from our students, while in some ways very harrowing, the example of what we've seen, and I know the feedback that I've got from patients and families of nurses who have sat and students who have sat with people at the very end of life and in very difficult situations, and what they have achieved and delivered. I have been very proud as a head of school of some of those students and the stories that have come through, but actually reinforces for me why I do what I do and the future there in terms of what these students and other new graduates can deliver.
It's brilliant you mentioned students, because we've got a current nursing student online. Sean Williams, are you there? Right, Sean might not be there. I do have Sean's question. Oh, hello.
I am here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Brilliant. Would you like to ask your question?
I would. Thanks, Tanni, and hello, panel, and everybody tuning in. So, does nursing education? Oh, sorry. I'm also need to be clear. I'm sort of student member of council, RCN Council at the moment, and ex officio member of the Students' Committee at the RCN. Anyway, my question: does nursing education in its current form, and acknowledging the NMC's future nurse standards and reforms underway, fully support the development of well-educated nursing graduates, and I'll also add to their fullest potential and to the potential of the profession?
I'm going to go with Hilary first.
Right, thank you. Again, great question. Thank you. I think what I'd say is I think the kind of 7 platforms that are within Futurenet are still important, and they're still sort of front and centre today. And it was that piece of work, I know it's probably, 3 years old now, I think, since it was published, but it was consulted on and it was co-produced. But I'm kind of going to go back to what I said earlier. It's like there's no room for complacency. We have to learn from the 18 months we've just been through, and we need to use our experiences to review where we're going in the future and the standards that we set for nurses and nursing as a profession. So I think it's sort of, you know, yes, there's nothing wrong with the work that we've got already at all. It was, you know, very, very thoughtful piece of work, but we mustn't lose sight of the need to be agile, to continue to adjust, to evolve, to move forward, to make sure that our workforce actually reflects the needs of the people where they're supposed to be serving. So, you know, our patients, our service users, our families, all those things. So I would sort of argue with, let's take the learning from what we've just been through, and let's ensure that those standards do stay extant and important and front and centre.
Thank you, Sonja.
Oh, sorry, you want me?
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I suppose to answer in terms of when we look and picking on from Hilary, you know, if we look at the 7 platforms that are there, and if we look at fundamentally what the standards and as you've said, in terms of the preparation there and the proficiency we expect and the programme outcomes and the graduate outcomes that we would expect, I do think we need an element of evaluation of all of this, because we're transitioning across to this programme and how we can see in our graduates. And it is important that we unpick and evaluate and look and don't just assume assume that in it. But when you look at the standards and when you step back and you look at what we expect our student nurses at the point of registration to be, and it comes back, I think, to one of my points I made at the start, you know, in terms of compassionate, safe and effective care, and what the public will know and expect from what a nurse can do and the knowledge they would have. I do think that the graduate outcomes that we see there, particularly around critical thinking, around decision making, around those higher level skills in terms of communication, around the clinical skills and the opportunities that we can see for the future nurse, I do think they speak to how we see the workforce evolving. But I also think it's important that we think about in terms of advanced practice and those other elements. We've focused around, you know, at the point of registration, it's important that we have a career framework and in the work that takes that forward to ensure that it is fit for purpose for the future demands that we see in terms of our health service and wider. And I think in terms of wider, you know, prevention of ill health, population health, the global health, you know, the sustainable development goals from the World Health Organization, all of the wider context that we are speaking to those. So I think it's a work in progress. I think we need to still evaluate and see in terms of the outcomes. But from my perspective in thinking of the graduates, I know that the graduates that we are producing are well thought of, are sought after, and in terms of employability are there and are delivering it there. It's the piece afterwards that I think we need to try in terms of the retention and those other pieces that we need to be working and delivering on further, but we still need to evaluate.
Brendan.
Thank you, and hi Sean, nice to see you off Twitter. I guess I'm going to answer this or respond to it. I don't think there's an answer. I'm going to respond to it by picking up some of the chat that's going on around what I said about the fast tracking of some graduates. Because I think that debate, which I think is really good to have that debate about how we do that and what we are doing, for me, says something about how we see nursing education here in the UK. So when I say fast tracking people who want to do a PhD, why not? Why not fast track others who are excellent clinicians at a very early stage to become leaders, to become managers, to become whatever? And I don't mean fast tracking by having privilege and not doing all the things that we need to do. So that's the boring bit. But it is about being brave enough to actually spot these people, whatever it is that we're trying to do, to enable them to reach a point where they can have maximum influence as well as their ongoing effectiveness. And unfortunately, I think we tend to have a much more kind of mono view of nursing education here in the UK, that just because the NMC standards require, you know, to demonstrate the meeting of those standards, doesn't mean that dictates the academic level at which they are achieved. And we need much greater variety around, yes, everyone has to meet those standards and show that on graduation. But what the NMC don't dictate is, do you do that at a BSc Honours, Masters, PhD? And in other countries, it is not unusual to actually graduate from your nursing program with a master's, as is the case for us now, to graduate actually in the US from your nursing program directly as a doctorate in nursing. And why not? Why not have those different levels that people are starting out their careers in, where they can really start to shape everything that's going on with their practice? And it links back to the very first question Tanni asked me about advancing the art and science of nursing. If we don't wake up to having those diversity of levels of expertise, really recognizing it, valuing it, then we will lose out. And I think it's really important that we absolutely kind of really pay attention to the different levels, the different expertise that we're looking at, and how all of that is made the most of to the best within our programs.
Brilliant, Brendan. Thank you very much. And now apologies now, I'm going to have to disappear off because I'm off to give out some social care awards. So hopefully there'll be a little bit of a glass of bubbly and a bit of a celebration to celebrate all the good things that are happening out there. I'm going to hand over to Professor McCourt in a second, but I just finally wanted to say thank you so much for allowing me to be part of this evening. It's just amazing. I'd be dead without the NHS and without nurses. And there's millions of people who know and understand that and value it. And just keep up the amazing work you're doing. It's absolutely fantastic. And with no further ado, Kath.
Thank you very much indeed, Tanni. Thank you. Good night. Have a nice evening. So we've heard some really fascinating answers in the last short while, but I just wondered from each of the participants if we could ask you, what one thing would you focus on for the future success of nurse education? And if we go to you, Brendan, and ask you first.
Wow. I guess for the future success of nursing education, I think the one thing I think we have to focus on is kind of being fleet of foot, really. I think we have to be much more able to kind of shift our focus quickly, to be responsive, to work at different levels, to engage in different connections, and to do it all in partnership. I think there's no doubt that the effectiveness of really good nursing education is a partnership model, partnership with service users, or whatever we wish to call people who are using services, partnership with providers, and a whole variety of partners in different ways. I think, again, we have a lot of development to do that. There's some great examples of that happening, but I think that ability to be really responsive and fleet of foot, I think is something we really need to be doing.
Thanks, Brendan. Sonja?
Yeah, and to build on that, I think as well, to also really never underestimate the value of education. Never underestimate it, because I think in any walk of life, and where it's shown, and we can have evidence that shows in terms of having educated, fully developed professions in any capacity has a real impact. So I agree that we have to value our education, value the basis that we have for it, and yet be responsive and be ready to evolve and change as the needs have to be changed. I'm going to have to take a drink of water.
You okay?
And that's really it. I think it's to be responsive and evolve with the evolving situation that we've been in, and take the learning and be creative, but never ever underestimate the value of education to our profession.
Thanks very much indeed. We'll move on to Hilary and let Sonja get a drink of water. Hilary.
Thanks, Kath. I agree with what my colleagues have said, but I'd add into that, let's listen. Listen to patients, listen to students, listen to staff, wherever they work, because everybody has a view and everybody can, it's not just, you know, a small number of people's views, it's about listening really widely, being agile, responsive, picking up the learning that we've had from everything. So I'd say listening really carefully to what people say to us about what works in education, what doesn't work in education. And I'm just going to end on a piece that's been in the chat box about fast track. I think we need to listen to everybody, all groups. I wasn't the fastest learner in the world, so I might have been a bit slow track actually. But you know, it's not just the fast trackers, it's also those who are coming through different routes, coming through different gateways. They all have something to add to this debate that will keep education vibrant and vital and still preparing nurses for what we need to do.
That's great. Thanks very much indeed, Hilary. We do have two other people on the line who've been part of planning tonight's events. And we have David Benton, who is a very experienced and senior nurse based out in Chicago. And I don't know if David is available. Just what do you think, David, looking into the UK nurse education programme? Do you have any wise comments or pieces of advice that you could give us?
Well, I wanted to connect the fact that Tanni was going off to social care awards, and I think one of the things that we've got to look at is the needs of society is in fact changing, and it's no longer a health system and a social care system, it's a health and social care system. So I think one of the challenges for the nursing profession is to recognise that changing need and to change the education system to align with those changing needs of society. I think the other issue, of course, is that many people are coming into nursing as a second or even a third career, and their needs are somewhat different from those that are coming straight from school as well. So I think the point that both Hilary and Brendan were making about agility, and Sonja in terms of listening more widely, is really important as we co-create the future of education in a way that is fit for the future and not just simply looking back to a model that has no longer serving the needs of society.
Well, thanks very much, David. I mean, Professor Jane Code is also on the call, and she's been part of our planning group. Jane, do you have any comments, particularly from your area of specialism?
Thank you, Kath. I think the debate's been really very, very interesting. And one of the things, I agree with David about that widening, but also I think once students come onto a course, I think we need to offer a range of things according to what they're looking for. I always wanted to do research, and I'm a bit like you, Hilary. I think I was on that slow track because I kept having to keep going on and on and on till I got the career I really wanted, which was to be a clinical academic researcher. But I think we need to really provide those placements and opportunities within the undergraduate curriculum. It can't just be a sort of, a sort of process. Obviously, we have the criteria of the NMC, but I think I'm seeing now nationally more really exciting, innovative schemes going on. I think we'll call them that, where people are getting different types of clinical placements, they're getting clinical experiences, different types of ways of learning, but also for me, research placements. And that is really exciting because that's about moulding careers for where people want to go. So that was the only thing I wanted to add.
No,
thanks.
Thank you very much, and thank you. I think there are a number of things in the chat about different education programs for other healthcare professionals, and how do we educate other healthcare professionals about the level of education our nursing students are receiving and the quality of a newly registered degree nurse. So I'm just going to put that to Brendan. What would be your advice, Brendan? How can we educate the rest of the healthcare professions about the level of nurse education and the quality of our nurses now?
Yep, thanks, Kath. I mean, again, I think this is a question that has to operate in terms of how we respond to it at multiple levels. So there's work that has to be done by organized or regulator in the sense of making very explicit what those standards are about to the public. And I know that's of course, a real focus of the NMC and what they're about. And similarly for the RCN, in terms of really finding different ways to profile the role of nurses and what it is we're actually doing, and the different education levels at which we're educated to and for. I think there is also a role for us ourselves, which is around really embracing interdisciplinary education. We, with the Council of Deans a couple of years ago, before COVID, at one of our events, had a focus on interdisciplinary education across the NMAP professions. And it was really quite interesting in terms of the diversity of interdisciplinarity, in terms of it can, in some programs consisting of one lecture, one day type of activity, whereas in others, it could be a whole module or a whole part of the program. And I think we need to get our head around it. It links to what David said about interdisciplinarity and what that really means in terms of profiling. But it also goes back to an earlier point about what we say when we talk about nursing, what it is we say when we talk about the role we have, what we do, how it is. I mean,
oh, I think Brendan's just seemed to have frozen.
We need to kind of really own our expertise and really celebrate that in the way we talk about nursing. And we, again, need to really build that into our programs so that people know what that's about, and also that we are very much doing that with other professions. So I think a broader look at interdisciplinarity with how I would kind of summarize it, but I think there's a lot within that we have.
Yeah, thanks, Brendan. I think we're just losing slight contact with him. Sonja, do you want to add anything to that comment from Brendan?
Yeah, I think it's embedding in interprofessional education and opportunities for that, and absolutely throughout our undergraduate program, and actually making it meaningful, not just tokenistic. And actually, whenever we have it, for example, we have a disaster simulation exercise that we work in, where we bring that in from pharmacy and from other people and try to really make from other services as well, in terms of an integrated system, to actually see, from a paramedic communicate to a nurse and to everyone else of what the roles are and what we all each contribute to patient care and to our healthcare system. And I think it's important to think of it within the system. But I do agree with Brendan in terms of we need to be clear as a nursing profession to have a voice around what our contribution actually is and to hold to that. When we talk about graduate and graduate qualities, we have developed and progressed as a profession over the years. We need to be very vocal within that and what that actually means, and proud of it, and be very clear of our contribution. And the pandemic has given us opportunities in terms of our visibility, but we need to build on that and progress that further at this particular point in time in our history.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed. Hilary, I might just ask you a slightly different question, if that's okay, because we're sort of moving along quite a bit in our timing. There was a question here that said whether future nurses might be underestimated due to the lack of placements in COVID. I mean, do you have a view on that? I think we touched on a little bit of that earlier.
Yeah, I think we did. I think, you know, crikey, sometimes we eat our young, don't we?
Yeah.
It's like, it's about valuing the learning that's, I mean, I think I said it earlier, Kath, really, I think it's about valuing the learning. And some of the nurses that are currently in training or have recently emerged from their training, they may have had a different experience, but they've still had an experience and they've still had learning, and they still have something to add and they still have something to contribute. And we need to open our minds to actually listen to those people, because I mean, for example, a newly registered nurse now has had an entirely different experience to the experience I had. Every day is a school day. I've got things to learn from those people. I haven't been through that. So I think we need to value people. And I think when you hear people say, oh, those nurses aren't going to be as good because they've trained in the pandemic, take them on, challenge them, ask them to justify why they think that, because I've got a completely different view, very happy to articulate it. You know, I think they've trained in a different way, but that doesn't devalue their training. I think for people like me, I have something to learn from them. So I think we need to challenge the naysayers, really.
Absolutely, no, I completely agree. And there's just a quick question here, and Sonja might be the best person to answer that. Someone is asking, how would one become a nurse educator without a master's qualification? So a little bit of career advice, I think, from that individual that's asking that.
Well, I think in terms of your development and where you come, I think it's great that you want to think about developing and thinking on the education. There's different routes through that in thinking of the academic. I think it speaks to what Brendan was talking about in terms of the academic and that piece as well. So, you know, you could think about doing your master's. You could go straight ahead and do a PhD and come in and actually say, okay, as he has given the pathway and the example, and I would agree with him in terms of, you know, new graduates coming through who show potential and interest, and as someone who very early in their career did a master's and then went on and did my PhD, and sort of think, right, okay, that's what I want to do and that's where I want to contribute. So think about, I think it's great you want to do it. Seek advice to people and to understand their roots. There's no one way, there's no one particular way. We've all come different ways into there, but I would encourage you, if you're interested in doing a master's, to think, go ahead and do it. Think about how you can progress your learning, and it is a lifelong, I think it's important for lifelong learning. And even as Hilary said, every day is a school day, and it's not just the academic learning, it's in all of the learning that we have. So, you know, think of the pathway, find out, and if you're determined that's what you want to do, make sure then you deliver on it and progress through and seize every opportunity.
That's great. Thanks very much indeed. I think we need now really to wind things up a bit, and I particularly would like to thank Hilary, Sonja and Brendan for giving their time this evening and for answering all of these questions very openly and very fully. I think we've all learned something. I'm definitely going to use boring, brave and bonkers at every occasion. Because I think that perhaps sums up many things that I know perhaps in my career, but in many of my colleagues' careers as well. It's often, I think they could fit them all under those headings. So thanks, Brendan, for that. I would also like to thank particularly the people who have helped plan this evening. This includes the Royal College of Nursing Library and Archives team, particularly Sarah Cheney, and my colleagues who've been working very, very diligently. So it was Jane Code, Danny Kelly, Alison Tierney, and David Benton, and sincere apologies that we weren't able to show the fabulous PowerPoint that Alison had prepared, but it will be online with the recording of this evening's events. And I'm sure you will find it extremely interesting to see how cleverly she's been able to chronologically show the development of nurse education. I'm now going to hand over to Professor Danny Kelly, who is from our organising group and is really going to close the event for us this evening. But I want to personally thank everyone, particularly all the students who've been online. And I know I've had lots of messages from the students of Birmingham University who I've not met, but I know they've been extremely enthusiastic in the last few weeks, and thank them for their contribution. So over to you, Danny.
Thank you, Kath. And I would just echo Kath's thanks to our speakers this evening. This is the second of the Fellows events, and I felt very strongly that the RCN Fellows are a wonderful group of very experienced and wise people, but the public don't know very much about them. They may do individually, but not as a group. So these events are intended to help to showcase some of the work that the Fellows have done in their career, and many are still doing. So thank you for joining us. And we're planning to do this twice a year. So there will be other events in 2022. And if you're sitting there thinking, well, I'd really like to hear about something else, and remember, we have fellows across education, practice, expert practice, research, policy, management. Please do put ideas in the chat, and please do keep in touch with the RCN Fellows email. It's rcnfellows@rcn.org.uk. So it's a very easy email, perhaps, to remember. The other thing I would say, of course, is that the Fellows have been going since 1976. So there's a whole archive of people who are no longer with us, but in whose footsteps we now walk. And those are people who blazed a trail through education, through research, through practice. Many of the things we've been talking about, they were doing back in their time. And what we want to do is also to showcase some of those people and give voice to their careers and their contributions. And we have wonderful interviews, archive interviews, that we want to share with the public and with members, so that you can also reflect on what the RCN Fellows have contributed and think about why were they offered this award of fellowship. So we have around 700 of those interviews, not just from fellows, but across nursing. So if you know somebody who you think should be interviewed, then please do get in touch and we can arrange to do that. So it just leaves for me to thank Tanni Grey-Thompson, a wonderful Paralympian. I mean, what better kind of motivation do we need is to hear from Tanni and her an endorsement of nursing at the present time. So thank you so much to Tanni, to Kath, to all our speakers this evening, to you for coming along. So thank you, everyone. Have a lovely evening, and I hope to see you at the next event.